Deep in the Louisiana bayou, where the cypress trees stand in dark water like sentinels, keeping secrets, a rusted houseboat sits forgotten at the end of a dock. Nobody wants it. Nobody has wanted it for a long time. The hull is streaked with rust. The windows are cracked and taped. The rope on the life ring rotted through years ago, and yet something about the way it sits in the water, low, patient, like it's been waiting. A boy walks to the end of that dock, 17 years old, one backpack, one dog, $15 in his pocket. He looks at the boat. The boat does not look back, but somewhere below the waterline, below the rotted floor, below everything visible, something is welded to the bones of this hull. Something sealed, something that has been waiting just as long as the boat itself. He doesn't know that yet. He's about to find out. Part 1. The boy who arrived with a dog and nothing else. The sun wasn't fully up yet. Just a thin line of orange behind the cypress trees, pale and uncertain, like it hadn't decided whether today was worth the effort. Owen Calloway stood at the end of the dock, 17 years old, one backpack, one duffel, and Sully sitting right beside him, close enough that Owen could feel the warmth coming off the dog's coat in the cool morning air. They both looked at the boat. The boat did not look back. It just sat there, low in the water, listing maybe 2 degrees to the left. Hull streaked with rust the color of old blood. Paint so faded you couldn't tell what color it had been originally. White, maybe, or gray. Or something that had once been cheerful and was now just tired. A crack ran along one window. Someone had covered it with duct tape years ago. The tape had gone yellow and brittle at the edges. The life ring hanging from the railing was still there, but the rope was rotted through. Sully's tail moved, slow, back and forth, like a metronome set to patient. Owen didn't say anything. He just stood there in the early Louisiana morning with the bayou going pink around them and the frogs finishing up their night shift, and he looked at the most busted-up piece of floating property he had ever seen in his 17 years. And he thought, okay, just that, okay. 3 days earlier, he had been in Mississippi, not in a good way. His father's name was Daniel Calloway, past tense now. Had been for 3 years. Daniel Calloway was a welder, the kind of welder who didn't just run beads, but understood metal the way some men understand horses. He knew what steel wanted to do before it did it. He could read a joint by looking at it. He could hear a bad weld the way a doctor hears a bad lung. He taught Owen to weld when Owen was 9. Not to play, to actually weld. He put the helmet on Owen's head. It swallowed him whole, that helmet, and Daniel had laughed a short bark of a laugh, and he showed Owen how to strike an arc, how to hold the angle, how to move with the puddle instead of fighting it. Owen burned through his first 3 rods and produced something that looked like a caterpillar made of mistakes. Daniel looked at it for a long time. "Better than my first one," he said. It probably wasn't true, but Owen held on to it anyway. Daniel died in an industrial accident at a fabrication yard in Pascagoula. Owen was 14. The accident report said equipment failure, which was another way of saying that a cable that should have been replaced 6 months earlier finally gave out at exactly the wrong moment. Nobody went to prison. Nobody paid a fine that meant anything. It just happened, the way things happen. And then it was over, and Daniel Calloway was gone, and Owen and his mother were left in a 3-bedroom house in Meridian, with a truck that needed new brake pads, and a dog that kept going to the door and waiting. Sully had been Daniel's dog first. A golden retriever from a litter out of a farm in Rankin County. Daniel brought him home as a puppy and named him after a character from some old Pixar movie that Owen had seen 100 times as a kid. Sully grew into his name big and golden and steady, the kind of dog that didn't require much. Just proximity, just being near the people he loved. After Daniel died, Sully transferred his loyalty to Owen without ceremony. He just moved from Daniel's side of the bed to Owen's. That was it. That was the whole thing. Owen's mother Renee remarried 18 months later. His name was Gary. Gary was not a bad man. Owen wanted to be clear about that, even in his own head, even on the worst nights. Gary was not cruel. Gary was not a drunk. Gary had a good job in insurance, and he made Renee laugh in a way Owen hadn't heard her laugh in 2 years, and if Owen tried hard enough, he could find something to appreciate about that. But Gary was a specific kind of man. The kind who walked into a room and immediately started calculating what in that room was a problem. Owen was a problem because Owen was quiet in a way Gary didn't understand. Because Owen spent weekends in the garage reading welding manuals. Because Owen answered questions with the minimum number of words required and then went back to whatever he'd been doing. Sully was a bigger problem because Sully was large and shed, and had a tendency to sit directly on Gary's section of the couch with a look of profound innocence, which honestly was fair. The morning it ended, Owen was at school. He came home and the house felt wrong before he even opened the door. Not loud wrong, just empty in the wrong direction. He went to the backyard. Sully's run was open. The water bowl was still there, full, fresh, but no Sully. Owen stood in the backyard for maybe 30 seconds, just processing. Then he went inside and found the note on the kitchen counter. Gary's handwriting. Neat. Efficient. Found a family in Madison who needed a good dog. He'll have more space there. Better for everyone. Owen read it twice. Then he put it down. Then he picked it up and read it a third time because he was sure he was misunderstanding something. He wasn't. He drove Gary's truck without asking. Madison was 41 miles north. He made it in 38 minutes, which was either a testament to his driving or a testament to how little he cared about speed limits in that specific moment. The family was named Perkins. Nice house, nice yard. 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10, who came to the door behind their mother with the particular wariness of children who sense adult tension. Owen said, "I'm sorry to bother you. The dog you got today, his name is Sully. He was my dad's dog. My dad passed away 3 years ago. I know this isn't your fault, and I'm not angry at you, but I need him back." He hadn't planned that speech. It just came out organized, like his brain had been running it in the background since Madison. The mother looked at him. Then she looked at her kids. Then she called Sully. Sully came around the corner of the house at a dead sprint, hit Owen in the chest like a golden freight train, nearly knocked him down. Owen grabbed the dog's face in both hands and held on. The Perkins woman said, "Take him, please." She didn't ask for the money back. Owen said thank you 4 times, which was 3 more times than he usually said anything. He drove back to Meridian, parked in front of the house, sat in the truck with Sully's head in his lap, and thought about what came next. It wasn't a hard calculation. Not really. The numbers were what they were. He had $23 in his wallet, some clothes, his dad's old welding handbook, the one with Daniel's notes written in the margins in green ink, the worn paperback on marine engine repair that he'd read so many times the spine had split, and Sully. He had Sully, which meant he had enough. He left a note for his mother, shorter than Gary's. Just, "I'm okay. I'll call when I get somewhere. Don't worry about Sully. He's with me." He thought about adding more. He thought about saying he loved her. He thought about saying he understood. He thought about explaining. He didn't. Some things don't come out right in notes. He put the note on the kitchen counter, right where Gary's had been. Then he picked up his bags. He looked at the house one more time. The kitchen with the yellow curtains. His mom had made herself the hallway with the picture of his dad at 22 squinting in summer sun, holding a fish he was clearly proud of. And then he pulled the door shut behind him. Sully walked beside him to the bus stop, like they'd always been doing this, like this was just the next thing. Owen's father had mentioned a man named Drexel Fontenay maybe a dozen times over the years, not in a dramatic way, just in the way fathers mention things. Drexel would know how to fix that. That's the kind of weld Drexel used to do on the big ones. Old Drexel out in Homa, now that man knows boats. Owen had filed it away without meaning to. The way you file away everything your father says when you're a kid, not because you think you'll need it, but because it's his voice, and his voice is worth keeping. Drexel Fontenay, Yuma, Louisiana. That was everything Owen had. He looked it up on his phone. There was a listing, Fontenay Marine Repair, Yuma, L.A. An address, no website, just a phone number that Owen didn't call because he wasn't sure what he would say. He bought the bus ticket instead. The ride from Meridian to Baton Rouge took 3.5 hours. Baton Rouge to Yuma took another hour and 40 minutes. Sully sat on the floor at Owen's feet the whole way, which was technically not allowed, and which the driver pointedly did not mention. Owen watched the land change through the window. Mississippi rolled into Louisiana, and the trees changed oaks, giving way to cypress, their roots standing in dark water Spanish moss hanging from the branches in long gray curtains like something out of an older world. The land got lower, wetter. The air visible through the glass looked thicker, more present, like the atmosphere itself had decided to show up and be noticed. Owen pressed his hand against the window. He didn't know why. It just seemed like the right thing to do. Drexel Fontenay was not what Owen expected. Owen had built up a picture in his head over the years, big man, loud, the kind of presence his dad described in a certain voice. He was expecting something large and certain. What he got was a short man in his early 60s, wiry, sun-darkened to the color of old teak, a white undershirt with a coffee stain on the left sleeve, reading glasses pushed up on his head. He was standing at a metal workbench when Owen pushed open the door of the shop, looking at a small outboard motor with the expression of a man who has been lied to and is taking it personally. He looked up. He looked at Owen. Then he looked at Sully. And he stopped. Not stopped moving. Stopped entirely, like someone had hit pause on him. He looked at the dog for a long time. Sully looked back. Then Drexel said very quietly, "Son of a, is that a dog out of that Rankin County line?" Owen said, "His name is Sully. He was my dad's dog first. The parent dogs came from a farm out in Rankin County, yeah. Your dad. Daniel Calloway." Drexel took his glasses off his head, put them on the workbench, rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture of a man recalibrating. Then he said, "How long have you been on a bus?" "About 5.5 hours. You hungry?" "No." A pause. "Yeah," Owen said. "A little." They ate sandwiches on the dock behind the shop. Drexel made them without asking what Owen wanted. White bread, roast beef, yellow mustard. Owen ate his in 4 minutes. Drexel watched without comment and made a second one. Sully got roast beef directly from Drexel's hand, which was apparently just going to happen, consent not required. The bayou was visible from the dock. A wide, dark channel running behind the property, cypress trees lining both banks, their root knees poking up from the water like patient old men keeping watch. A great blue heron stood on a half-submerged log, about 30 feet out, motionless, waiting for something that might not come, but that it intended to wait for regardless. Drexel said, "I haven't thought about Daniel Calloway in—" He shook his head. "Long time." "He mentioned you when I was growing up." "What did he say?" "Said you knew boats. Said you were the kind of man who knew how things worked." Drexel looked at the water. "He was a better welder than me," he said. "Wouldn't tell him that when he was alive. Would have made him insufferable." He paused. "How long's he been gone?" 3 years. "I'm sorry." Owen nodded. They sat for a moment with the heron and the bayou and the morning. Then Drexel stood up. "Come on, there's something I want to show you." They walked the length of the dock. It ran along the back of the property, maybe 80 feet. 3 boats tied along the near side, a fishing skiff with a small center console, an aluminum John boat with a small outboard, a cabin cruiser that needed paint but looked seaworthy. At the very end of the dock, past everything else tied off on its own cleat, with a little extra distance between it and the other boats, as if even the marina had decided to give it some space. The Houseboat. 34 feet long, flat-bottom steel hull, 3/16-inch plate. Owen could tell from the way it sat in the water the weight and depth of it. Designed for slow water, for the bayou. Not built to go anywhere fast, built to stay. The hull was rust-streaked from waterline to deck. The cabin on top was cypress wood. The cypress had weathered to silver gray, the joints swollen and gapped from years of humidity. 2 small windows on each long side, a weathered door facing the dock. An old life ring hung crooked on the rail, the rope rotted but still technically attached. It listed maybe 2 degrees to port, not from damage, just from settling, from being in one place for a long time and becoming comfortable there. Drexel pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket, handed it to Owen. It was a marina fee sheet. 1-line entry Harlan Guidry. Slip 7, balance outstanding $15. The man's name was Harlan Guidry, Drexel said. Worked as a welder out of different yards around Houma for about 40 years. Bought that boat in '78. Lived on it from that day until the day he died. When did he die? March. Last year. 91 years old. Owen looked at the boat. No family, he asked. None that claimed him. What happens to it? Marine'll sell it for scrap if nobody pays the fees. Steel value alone is worth more than $15, so they'd come out ahead. Drexel looked at Owen. If somebody paid the $15 and signed the transfer paperwork, Louisiana law is pretty clear. Abandoned vessel with outstanding fees, ownership transfers clean. Owen looked at the bill. He reached into his jacket pocket, counted out $15, a 10 4 ones and 4 quarters, and laid it on top of the paper. Drexel looked at the money, then at Owen. You don't know what you're getting into, he said. I know what the hull looks like, Owen said. Steel that thickness can be saved. The cabin cypress that can be replaced board by board. The shape's good. Flat bottom stable on this kind of water. Drexel raised an eyebrow. My dad taught me to look at the bones first, Owen said. The bones are good. A long pause. Drexel looked at the boat, then at the $15 on top of the paper, then at Owen one more time. Then he picked up the money. I'll get the paperwork, he said. That was how Sully got on the boat before Owen did. Owen was still standing on the dock, holding the transfer document, reading the fine print. Drexel had gone back to the shop to find a pen, and Sully just walked up the small gangplank that Drexel had laid against the hull, stepped onto the deck, walked to the bow, and sat down, pointed his nose out toward the bayou, tail moving, slow and steady. Owen watched him. The dog looked like he'd come home, which was a strange thought, because Sully had never been to Louisiana in his life. Owen folded the document, put it in his jacket pocket, and followed his dog onto the boat. The inside was worse than the outside, which was saying something. The cabin was roughly 10 by 14 feet. The bunk along one wall had a mattress that was a biological hazard, stained, compressed to nothing, sprouting something gray at one corner that Owen decided not to look at directly. The galley had a propane stove that had corroded into a single, unified object. 2 folding chairs, a table, cabinets along the walls, wood swollen from years of humidity, some of them no longer capable of closing all the way. The smell was mildew and old oil and something else, something faintly sweet, that water-damaged wood gets after enough years. Not unpleasant exactly, just old, like breathing in time itself. But the walls were structurally present. The deck underfoot was steel. The frame was intact. Owen pressed on a wallboard. It gave slightly, needed replacing, but the frame behind it, the structural member, was firm. He crouched down and knocked on the deck. Steel. Solid. He stood up and looked at the ceiling. Low. 6 feet 2 inches maybe. He'd have to be careful about his head in the mornings. But solid. The light coming through the small windows was green gold. Bayou light. Filtered through water and Spanish moss and the particular slant of Louisiana afternoon sun. It was the color of something that had been settling for a long time and had finally arrived at peace. Owen stood in the center of the cabin, He turned slowly. Something in his chest did something he didn't have a word for. Not hope exactly, not happiness. Something older than either of those things. Something that recognized this place before his brain had formed a reason. He'd been drawing pictures of boats since he was 5. Not because his dad told him to, just because boats made sense to him. The logic of them. The way every part had a function. The way a boat was a system, and a system could be understood, and a thing that could be understood could be fixed. The cabin walls were close. The ceiling was low. The floor moved slightly with the small wake of a fish jumping somewhere outside. And Owen thought, this is the first place I've been in 3 years that feels the right size. He slept on the floor that first night. His sleeping bag, the rotted mattress shoved against the wall, Sully curled against his legs, a solid weight that anchored the sleeping bag and the night both. The bayou outside was loud, louder than anything Owen had heard in Mississippi. Frogs in chorus, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, layered frequencies building into something that was less noise and more presence. An owl somewhere in the cypress. The slow lap of water against the steel hull, a sound Owen felt as much as heard a rhythm that went through the boat and through the floor and into his bones like something his body had been waiting to remember. A splash somewhere close. Big, probably a fish. Maybe not. He lay awake for a long time, not afraid. Or not only afraid, something else too. Something that had been absent for 3 years and had no obvious name. He lay in the dark and listened to the bayou, and after a while, he stopped trying to identify the feeling and just let it be there. At some point, he slept. Drexel came at 6 in the morning with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag of biscuits from a place down the road. They sat on the dock and ate. The bayou caught the early sun and threw it back gold. "Tell me what you see," Drexel said. Owen thought about it, took a sip of coffee, looked at the hull. "Hull first," he said. "I need to pull her out of the water and get eyes on the full plate. I'm guessing waterline rust down to the keel. Some of it's probably surface. Some of it's probably not. And if it's not surface, grind it back. Phosphoric acid on the deep pitting. Marine epoxy to build up. Feather it into the surrounding plate. 2 coats primer. 3 coats enamel." Drexel nodded slowly. "Cabin. Strip it to the frame. Every board that's compromised comes out. Re-insulate. New walls I'd do marine plywood sheathed with cypress. Rebuild the galley. Get a proper propane system with a regulator and a CO detector. Rewire from scratch with marine-grade cable. How long?" Owen looked at the boat. "If I do it right," he paused, "6 months, maybe 8. And if you do it wrong, then I do it again." Drexel looked at him over his coffee cup for a long moment. "Your daddy used to say something like that," he said. "He used to say there's no such thing as a mistake in metal, just a weld you haven't fixed yet." Owen didn't answer. He looked at the water. He thought, yeah, that sounds right. He started on the bilge that afternoon. The bilge is the lowest space in the boat. Below the cabin floor, below the living area. It's where water collects and where things settle over time. Oil residue debris, the slow accumulation of everything a boat encounters over decades of use and decades of sitting. It's also where problems start if you're not paying attention. And Owen was always paying attention. He lifted the hatch in the cabin floor. Dark water. About 8 inches deep, smelling of rust and old fuel and time compressed into liquid. He bailed it out with a bucket and a coffee can he found in one of the swollen cabinets, crouching in the hatch opening, working for 2 hours until his back ached and his arms felt like cable that had been wound too tight. Sully sat nearby and watched with the focused attention of a dog who finds human labor genuinely compelling television. The water came out dirty, and then less dirty, and then clear. Owen shone his flashlight down into the empty bilge. The bottom was steel plate, same as the hull, rust-stained but intact. Along the hull, frames, the curved steel ribs that ran from keel to deck. Owen could see the welds that held the plate to the frame. Old welds, 50s or 60s vintage by the look of them. Not pretty, but solid. Done by someone who understood that function mattered more than aesthetics. He moved the flashlight slowly, and that's when he saw it. At the port side aft corner of the bilge, tucked in behind the last hull frame sitting on a small platform of steel angle iron that had been welded to the frame specifically to raise it above the floor level, was a box. Not a box that had been placed there and forgotten. A box that had been welded there. Steel construction, maybe 14 inches long, 10 inches wide, 8 inches deep. Painted with what looked like several careful coats of gray epoxy primer. The seam where the lid met the body had been sealed. Owen could see the faint ridge of additional material applied precisely along the entire perimeter. Someone had used epoxy to seal it. Marine epoxy, the kind that doesn't fail. The box itself was welded to the angle iron platform at 4 points. 4 solid beads, 1 at each corner, run by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had taken their time doing it. The platform was welded to the hull frame, so the box was in effect welded to the bones of the boat. Owen stared at it. His flashlight beam sat on it and didn't move. Sully came to the edge of the hatch opening and looked down. His tail stopped moving. He sniffed the air coming up from the bilge. Then he made a sound, not a bark, lower than a bark. A soft, focused sound, almost like a word he didn't have the anatomy to form. Owen looked at the dog, then back at the box. He thought about Harlan Guidry, 91 years old, dead last March, lived on this boat for 46 years. A welder, a man who knew exactly what it meant to join metal permanently. A man who at some point during those 46 years had decided to weld something to the inside of his own hull and seal it shut with the best sealant available and leave it there. Not by accident, not by carelessness, by deliberate considered choice. Owen reached down into the bilge and put his hand on the box. The metal was cold, smooth where the epoxy primer had been applied with care, solid in a way that felt intentional. Not a hint of give at any of the 4 welds. Whoever had run those beads had done it knowing they needed to last. He pressed his palm flat against the surface. He thought about his father, about green ink in the margins of a welding handbook, about the way Daniel Calloway used to explain metal as if it were alive, as if steel had preferences, had tendencies, had things it wanted to do, and things it would resist no matter how you pushed. He thought about what his father would say right now. He could almost hear it. Read it before you open it. Which was something Daniel said about everything. Engines, drawings, contracts, situations. Understand what you're looking at before you touch it. Know the intention before you respond to it. Owen took his hand off the box. He sat back on his heels. He looked at it for a long time. Then he went to find Drexel. Drexel came back with him. They both crouched at the edge of the bilge hatch with a flashlight looking at the box. Drexel was quiet for a long time. "Well," he said finally. "Yeah," Owen said. "That's Harlan's work. I'd know that weld pattern anywhere. See how he terminates the bead, rolls it back about a 1/4 inch at the end. That's a habit. I've seen it on every piece of Harlan's work I ever came across over 20 years. Owen said he welded it to the frame. He did. Sealed the lid with epoxy. He did. So he didn't want it to move. No, he didn't. A pause. He also didn't want water to get in, Owen said. No, he didn't. They both looked at the box in the cone of flashlight. Drexel said, Harlan was a private man. I knew him for 20 years, and I couldn't tell you his middle name. He talked about work, about the weather, about a particular kind of crawfish preparation that he considered everyone else to be doing catastrophically wrong. He paused. He never talked about the war, never talked about money, never talked about the past. Korea, 50 to 53, 1st Marine Division. Drexel shook his head slowly. He mentioned it once. Said I went. I came back. That's the whole story. And that was the whole story he ever told anybody. Owen looked at the box. He thought about a man who came back from a war with things he couldn't put down and bought a boat and welded something to its bones and sealed it shut and lived on top of it for 46 years. He thought about what a man like that would put in a box like that. And he thought, I'm not ready yet. I don't know enough yet. This needs to wait. He didn't open it. He closed the bilge hatch. He sat on the floor of the cabin. Sully came and put his head on Owen's knee, the weight of it familiar and grounding. Outside, the bayou light was going orange and gold, the sun dropping behind the cypress trees, the water turning through its evening colors. Owen put his hand on the dog's head. He thought about his father. He thought about the note he'd left for his mother on the kitchen counter. He thought about $15. He thought about what it meant that of all the places he could have gone, he'd come here, to a boat at the end of a dock in southern Louisiana, to a place his father had mentioned a dozen times in a voice that meant, this is worth knowing, this is worth remembering. He wasn't sure yet what any of it meant, but he thought it might mean something, and that was enough for one day. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Owen slept without waking up in the middle of the night. He didn't know why. The floor was hard. The boat moved with the water. The bayou was loud with everything alive in it. But something about the motion, that slow, constant rocking the boat alive and breathing under him, did something to his nervous system that 8 months of his own bed in Meridian had never managed to do. Like his body had been waiting for exactly this frequency, like something in him recognized the rhythm and decided to trust it. He slept 7 hours without moving. Sully slept curled against the backs of his knees. When Owen woke, the first gray light was coming through the small windows. The cypress trees outside were dark shapes against a pale sky that was just beginning to decide what color it wanted to be. The water was still. He lay there for a moment, not thinking, just there. Then he got up. He had work to do. Part 2. What was welded to the bones of the boat? The box sat in Owen's mind all night. He didn't open it. Not yet. He just lay there on the cabin floor with Sully against his legs and the bayou doing its nighttime things outside. And he thought about a man named Harlan Guidry who had lived on this boat for 46 years and welded a steel box to its ribs and sealed it with epoxy, and never, as far as anyone knew, told a single person it was there. Or maybe he had told someone. Maybe he told exactly the right person, and that person just hadn't shown up yet. Until now. Morning came slow and gold. Owen was already up. He'd been up since 5. Standing at the edge of the bilge hatch with his flashlight, not touching the box, just looking at it, learning it the way his father had taught him to learn a weld before you touched it, understand the intention first. What was the person trying to do? What were they protecting? What did they want to make sure would last? Harlan Guidry had been protecting something. That much was clear from the 4 welds alone. They were deliberate, not fast, not anxious, not the work of someone acting quickly before they change their mind. The kind of weld you run when you have time and patience, and you want the thing to stay exactly where you put it for longer than you'll be alive to see the result. The epoxy seal on the lid was the same. Careful. Applied in one continuous bead. No gaps. No areas where someone had rushed and gone back to patch. No shortcuts of any kind. This was not a man who hid something in a hurry. This was a man who decided, thought it through, made a plan, and then executed the plan correctly. Owen respected that more than he could say. He closed the hatch, made coffee on the small camping stove he'd brought in his pack, sat on the deck with his mug, and watched the bayou wake up. 2 herons this morning landing on a half-submerged log with the elaborate dignity of creatures who have never once been in a hurry in their entire evolutionary history. Then the smaller birds came, kingfishers, something red and fast that Owen didn't know the name of but filed away to look up later. Sully sat beside him and watched the birds with professional interest and did not chase them. which was Owen thought a sign of genuine character. Drexel arrived at 7 with a paper bag and a problem. The bag had kolaches in it. The problem was already on his face before he got to the end of the dock. "Marina manager called me this morning," he said, sitting down and handing Owen a kolache without ceremony. "Someone's been asking questions about this slip." "What kind of questions?" "Who owns it now, whether the transfer paperwork's been filed, whether there are any assets associated with the vessel." Owen looked at him. "Assets," Owen said. That was the specific word. Owen took a bite of his kolache, chewed slowly, thought. Who was asking? "Man named Marcus Teal, out of Baton Rouge." Drexel said the name like it tasted like something he'd rather not have in his mouth. "He's a property broker, does what he calls estate acquisitions, which means he finds things that belong to people who died without family, and he figures out how to get his hands on them." "Is that legal?" "Some of it." "And the rest of it?" Drexel looked at the water. "The rest of it depends on who's watching and whether anyone's paying attention." Owen finished his kolache, brushed the crumbs off his knee. Sully watched the crumbs fall with an expression of restrained personal tragedy. "He doesn't know about the box," Owen said. "Nobody knows about the box except you and me." "Then we don't tell anyone about the box." Drexel looked at him carefully. "That easy for you." "I haven't opened it yet," Owen said. "I don't know what's in it. I know it's Harlan's work. I know it's on my boat. Everything else is just noise until I know more." He paused. "My dad always said, don't solve problems you don't have yet." Drexel was quiet. Then, "Yeah, that sounds like Daniel." He reached into the paper bag and pulled out the leather-bound notebook they'd taken from the box the evening before. Set it on the dock between them. "Let's see what Harlan left us to work with," he said. The notebook was extraordinary. Owen had set it on the table the evening before and looked at the cover, dark brown leather, cracked and soft with age, the kind of soft that comes from being handled regularly over many years. But he hadn't opened it. He'd been waiting. For what, he wasn't sure. Maybe for morning. Maybe for someone else to be present. Maybe just for the moment to feel right. He opened it now with Drexel sitting across the table. Harlan Guidry's handwriting was not elegant. It was the handwriting of a man who had used his hands for other things his whole life. Tight, functional, slightly cramped with letters that leaned forward like they were always trying to get somewhere. But it was precise. Every line had a purpose. Nothing was written that wasn't meant to be there. The first page was a materials list, steel plate specs, epoxy grades, primer types, paint codes, everything Owen would need listed in order of application with notes in the margins about where to source each item in HOMA specifically. The second page was a structural diagram, hand-drawn, hull cross-section accurate to scale by the look of it, with measurements marked in red ink and problem areas circled and annotated in the cramped functional script. Port bow frame, check this first. Soft spot in the plate. Waterline on starboard side, rust goes deep here. Don't guess. Grind it back all the way. Keel weld center solid. Don't touch it. Owen turned the pages slowly. Drexel leaned over to look. Neither of them said anything for a while, because what they were looking at was not just a repair manual. It was a conversation. Harlan Guidry had written this notebook for someone. Not for himself, he already knew everything in it. He'd built this boat's systems from the beginning, repaired them, rebuilt them, updated them over 46 years. He didn't need notes. He could have done this work in the dark, from memory. He'd written it for whoever came next. He'd written it for whoever would care enough to do the work right. And in the margin of page 7, in slightly different ink darker, written at a clearly different time, maybe years after the rest, a single handwritten line. "If you're reading this, you already paid the $15. That tells me what I need to know about you." Owen read it twice. Drexel read it twice. They looked at each other across the table. "He knew," Owen said. "He planned for it," Drexel said, which was not the same thing, but was maybe more impressive than simply knowing. Owen turned to the last page with writing on it. The instruction was simple. Just 3 sentences standing alone on the page. Do the hull first. All of it. When it's done, and you'll know when it's done because you won't be able to find anything else wrong with it, open the envelope. Not before. Owen closed the notebook, placed it carefully on the table, stood up. I need to borrow your winch system, he said. They pulled the boat out of the water that afternoon. It was a production. Drexel had a marine railway behind the shop, a set of heavy wooden rails that ran from the water up a gentle slope into the yard with a winch-driven carriage that could haul a vessel up and set it on blocks. He'd built it himself 20 years earlier and maintained it with the particular dedication of a man who knows exactly how much he has come to depend on a piece of equipment. The houseboat came up slowly, and as it came up, as the hull emerged from the water, inch by inch, the steel plate dark and dripping revealing itself in sections, Owen saw the full picture for the first time. It was worse than he'd thought. Not catastrophically worse, but significantly worse than the waterline had suggested from dock level. The rust wasn't just surface oxidation in the problem areas Harlan had marked. In 3 places along the port side, it had gone deep. Not through, not yet, but deep enough that you could see where the steel had been slowly losing thickness over years of being alternately wet and dry, the rust working inward with the patience of something that had no deadline. The port bow area Harlan had circled in red was exactly as described. A section of plate, maybe 2 feet square, where the surface had pitted badly, the metal rough and friable at the worst points, the original plate thickness visibly reduced. Owen stood in the yard looking at it. He put his hand on the worst section, pressed his thumbnail into the steel, felt the resistance still solid at the core, still structural, but thinner than it should be, and getting thinner every season. Behind him, Drexel said, "What do you think?" "I think Harlan knew exactly what he was talking about," Owen said, "and I think I have a lot of grinding to do." He started the next morning, 6 a.m., angle grinder with a flap disc, safety glasses, ear protection. Sully had immediately understood that the grinder meant he should relocate to a position of personal dignity, approximately 20 feet upwind. The grinding was loud and relentless and absolutely necessary. Owen worked section by section the way the notebook told him to, the way his father had taught him, the way any honest work has to be done if you want it to last. You don't rush ahead to the part that feels like progress. You do the unglamorous part first. You find out exactly how bad the bad parts actually are before you start fixing anything. What he found methodically over the first 3 days: 3 areas of significant deep pitting, 2 previous patch attempts, sheet metal screwed over problem spots years ago, the screws rusted through, now the patches lifting at the edges, an entire section along the port waterline where decades of paint had been hiding a slow rust bloom that had been quietly expanding for at least a decade, maybe longer. Also, because Owen was thorough, 7 areas that looked concerning from the outside and turned out to be completely fine. Solid plate under the surface oxidation, good steel that just needed cleaning and protection, because that was the other thing his father had always said about honest inspection. Sometimes things are better than they look. You don't know until you look all the way. Owen cataloged everything, made his own notes in a spiral notebook he bought from a small general store about a mile down the road. Measurements, depths, locations, photographs on his phone at each stage of discovery. The kind of record that meant if he ever needed to explain what he'd done and why, he could show someone exactly what he'd found and exactly what he'd done about it. Document everything his father used to say. Someday, someone's going to need to understand what you did. Maybe that someone is you. The community came to him. He didn't ask. He didn't know anyone. He was a 17-year-old from Mississippi who had showed up with a dog and $15 and no plan beyond the next step. But the bayou has its own logic, its own way of deciding who belongs and who doesn't, and its own timeline for communicating that decision. Buddy Trosclair came first, 50s, crawfish fisherman, Face like leather left in the sun for so many seasons, it had achieved a kind of permanent toughness. He walked down the dock one morning, looked at what Owen was doing, and said nothing for a full minute. Just watched. Then, "You know what you're doing with that grinder." "Yes." "You know how to read a rust pattern, tell the difference between surface and structural." "Yes." Buddy watched him work for another minute. Then he left without another word. He came back 2 days later with a cooler of crawfish and a folding chair, set the chair up at a safe distance from the grinding dust, started sorting his crawfish, didn't say anything, just was there, present, available, watching. That was it. That was his version of welcome. Vera Daigle came by at the end of the first week. She ran the small general store down the road, the kind of store that sold everything from motor oil to dried red beans to birthday cards, and she had the manner of someone who had seen most things and was no longer surprised by any of them. She brought a mason jar of something dark and fragrant and set it on the dock beside Owen's water bottle. "Etouffee," she said. "Don't argue." Owen did not argue. She looked at the boat for a long time. Her eyes moved over the hull work Owen had done so far, the ground sections clean and silver in the afternoon light, the acid treatment drying on the deep, pitting the first coat of epoxy primer going on carefully over the port bow. "Harlan would have liked seeing this," she said. "You knew him well." "Since I was 30 years old." She handed him the jar. "He bought his groceries from me for 20-some years. Never talked much, but he always paid on time and he always said thank you. And in my experience, that combination is a better measure of character than most of the things people use." She paused. "He talked about this boat like it was a living thing," she said. "Said she'd outlast him if he gave her half a chance. Said she just needed someone who understood steel." Owen looked at the hull. "He left instructions," Owen said. Vera nodded, completely unsurprised. "Of course he did." Then came Nettie Arsenault. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a sensible sedan, walked down the dock with a canvas tote bag over one arm and reading glasses pushed up on her head, looked at Owen working, looked at Sully sitting nearby, watching the whole operation with his characteristic focused calm, and said, "You're the boy who bought Harlan's boat." Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "How old are you?" 17. She looked at the hull work. Her eyes were sharp and specific in a way that suggested she was actually evaluating it, not just looking. "That primer application is correct," she said. "Most people put it on too thin. You've got the right thickness." Owen looked at her. "I was Terrebonne Parish court clerk for 31 years, she said, as if this explained the primer observation. She sat down on a dock, piling decisively like someone who has sat on considerably worse things. "I knew Harlan from his veterans benefits paperwork. He always did his own. Wouldn't let anyone help him complete it, but he'd come in and ask questions sometimes. Made sure he understood every form before he signed anything." She paused. "That's a man who respects documentation, who understands that paper is what holds things in place in this world." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a ball of yellow yarn and 2 knitting needles, and she just started knitting, right there on the dock piling. "You keep working," she said. "I'll talk. You can listen or not. But I knew Harlan for a long time, and it seems like you should probably know some things about the man whose boat you're living on." Owen kept working. He listened to every word. Nettie talked about Harlan the way people talk about someone they genuinely respected carefully, not sentimentally, not with the soft, focused nostalgia that makes the dead easier to deal with, but less true, just accurately. He had come back from Korea in 1953, 21 years old, didn't talk about what had happened there, got his welding certification on the GI Bill within 6 months of returning. Worked at a series of yards along the Gulf Coast through the 60s and 70s, bought the boat in 1978. "Why the boat?" Owen asked, not looking up from his work. "I asked him that once," Nettie said. The clicking of her needles was steady, unhurried. He thought about it for a while before he answered. Then he said on land, everything spreads out, gets complicated, gets loud in ways that have nothing to do with actual noise. On the water, you know exactly where you are. You know exactly what you've got. And if something breaks, you fix it. She kept her eyes on her knitting. He said a boat is an honest thing. It doesn't pretend to be more than it is. Owen ran his hand along the freshly primed plate. He understood that. He understood it completely and without having to think about why. 5 weeks in, the grinding done, the acid treatment done, the epoxy fills done, built up in patient layers over the worst, pitting feathered carefully into the surrounding plate until the transitions disappeared and you couldn't tell where the repair began and the original steel ended. Owen stood back and looked at the hull. He'd been over every inch of it, every single square foot. He knew this hull now, the way you know something you've touched 10,000 times from every angle. He knew where it was strong. He knew where it had been weak and was now strong again because he'd made it strong again. He started the primer. Marine epoxy, primer gray thick, the kind that bonds to steel with genuine commitment. 2 coats. He rolled it on in sections careful and even the roller, leaving a surface like fine orange peel that would give the top coat something real to hold on to. Drexel came by the second day of priming, stood and looked, said, "You know what color you want for the finish." Owen said, "Navy, dark navy, almost black in shadow, but when the sun hits it blue, deep blue." Drexel nodded slowly. "I know a paint mixer in town. Been blending marine paint for 40 years. I'll take you tomorrow." They went the next morning. The shop was small and smelled like solvents and the particular chemical sharpness that Owen recognized from his father's garage on the days when something serious was being done. The man behind the counter was named Alphonse, and he had paint stains on his forearms that had clearly been there long enough to be considered permanent features. He looked at Owen. He looked at the color chip. Owen had brought a piece of painted steel from a sample board, the darkest navy in the collection. "Darker than that," Owen said. "Almost black when there's no direct light, but when the sun hits it at the right angle blue, deep blue, like deep water at the end of the day." Alphonse looked at the chip for a long moment. Then he went into the back without saying anything. He came out with a quart he'd already mixed. Set it on the counter. "I mixed this last year for a customer who never came back," he said. "Go look." Owen opened the can. The color inside was exactly right. Exactly. The way certain things are right before you have the vocabulary to explain why. Like the rightness is something you feel in your chest before your brain processes it. "How much?" Owen said. "For however much I need to do a 34-foot hull in 3 coats. Alphonse did the math in his head, told Owen the number. Owen nodded. "I'll take it." Then Marcus Teal showed up. He came on a Thursday. Owen was on the second coat of finish paint, working the port side in long, even passes when he heard footsteps on the dock behind him. He didn't look up right away. He was in the middle of a section, and breaking the line meant going back and redoing it. When he finished the section and set the roller down, there was a man standing at the far end of the dock. 30s, possibly early 40s. Suit jacket, expensive, completely wrong for the weather and the setting over an open collar shirt. Nice shoes that were already having serious problems with the dock surface. He had the look of a man who spent his time preparing for negotiations rather than for work. Everything about him was prepared, and nothing was genuine. He smiled when Owen turned. Professional smile, the kind that gets practiced in mirrors. "You Owen Calloway," he said. "Who's asking?" "Marcus Teal." He produced a business card and held it out. "Property consultant, Baton Rouge. I represent some parties with an interest in this vessel." Owen looked at the card, didn't take it. "The vessel is mine," Owen said. "Transfer of ownership is documented and filed with both the marina and the parish recorder's office." Teal's smile didn't shift. "Well, that's what I wanted to discuss." There's some question about whether an informal transfer of an abandoned vessel, especially one with potential estate assets attached, constitutes a fully legal, I have the paperwork, signed, witnessed, filed. Of course. But my client, a Mr. Dwight Guidry, believes he may have a familial claim to. Does Mr. Guidry have documented lineage establishing a legal heir relationship to Harlan Guidry? A pause. Teal blinked. Just once. He's in the process of establishing. Then he doesn't have a claim. Owen picked up his roller, loaded it from the tray. Have a good afternoon. Silence on the dock. Son, I'm trying to be cooperative here. My client is prepared to offer fair market value for the vessel as is, which would be considerably better than I'm not selling. You haven't heard the number. I don't need to. Owen ran the roller up the hull. Even. Steady. The dark navy went on, clean and deep. Teal stood there for another moment, recalculating. I'll be in touch, he said. His footsteps went back down the dock. Careful footsteps, the kind that are trying not to slip in expensive shoes on a surface that has no patience for expensive shoes. Sully watched him leave with the expression of a dog who has formed a firm and unflattering opinion. Owen kept painting. Teal escalated. Over the following 2 weeks, he sent 2 certified letters to the marina address. He spoke to the marina manager, a pragmatic man named Saunier, who immediately reported the conversation word for word to Drexel because he had a low tolerance for people who came onto his dock in suits and asked questions that felt like threats. Teal made inquiries at the parish recorder's office about the transfer documentation. Nettie heard about those inquiries within 24 hours because Nettie had worked in that building for 31 years and knew everyone currently working there and the channels through which information moved when it needed to. She came to Owen on a Saturday morning, sat on her piling, pulled out her knitting. Tell me exactly what paperwork you have, she said. Every document, every date, every signature. Owen told her. All of it. She knitted for a moment, processing, her needles moving at their usual steady pace while her mind worked at something faster. The transfer is solid, she said. Louisiana law on abandoned vessels with outstanding fees is clear and specific. You paid. It's documented. That's legally done. She paused. But Teal knows that. He's not actually challenging the vessel transfer directly. Then what is he actually doing? He's fishing, she said. He doesn't know what's on that boat. But something about the situation, a man who lived alone for 46 years and clearly didn't spend his money. Someone with Teal's particular instincts can smell that kind of situation from Baton Rouge. Owen looked at the hull. 3rd coat going on tomorrow. What do I do? He said. You finish the boat, Nettie said. You make sure every piece of paper you have is in order and accessible. And you let me look into Mr. Teal. She smiled. It was a small, precise smile, the kind that suggested the person smiling it has a plan. 31 years as a court clerk, you learn to read documents properly, and you learn to recognize when documents are wrong in ways that matter. Owen came back to the boat that evening to find Buddy already sitting on the dock. This was not unusual anymore. Buddy sitting on the dock in the evenings had simply become a thing, gradually, and without anyone formally deciding it. It had just started happening, and then continued happening, and now it was part of the rhythm of the days. Buddy had boiled crawfish and 2 bottles of Barks root beer. He pushed one toward Owen without ceremony or comment. They ate. Sully received crawfish shells which he clearly felt were beneath his dignity, but accepted anyway in the spirit of not making a scene. Buddy said, "This Teal character been bothering you? Sent some letters? You worried?" Owen thought about it honestly before answering. "I'm worried about what's in the box," he said. Because if there's something in that box that someone like Teal could construct a legal argument about, I need to understand what it is before he figures out there is a box. Buddy nodded slowly. "What do you think's in it?" "I don't know exactly, but Harlan saved his whole life and didn't spend much of anything. The math on that over 46 years, it could be significant. And Teal would want it. Teal would find a way to want anything he thought he could reach. Buddy ate a crawfish, threw the shell into the water. A small fish hit the surface immediately after it. Harlan was a good man, Buddy said. Not easy, not warm exactly, but completely fair in everything I ever saw. He owed me money once, $30 from a bet on an LSU game, and he paid it the next morning before I'd even woken up. Slid it under my door in an envelope with the exact amount written on the outside. He paused for a moment. A man who pays his debts like that doesn't leave loose ends, Buddy said. Whatever's in that box. However Harlan set it up, it's handled. He would have made absolutely sure of it. Owen thought about the notebook, the careful, precise handwriting, the marginal notes, the single line in slightly darker ink. If you're reading this, you already paid the $15. He nodded. He thought Buddy was right. He was fairly sure Buddy was right. 2 more weeks. The finish coats went on. 3 of them, each one sanded lightly before the next building up a surface that deepened in color with each coat until the hull was exactly the color Owen had described to Alphonse Navy. So dark it looked almost black when you were standing next to it, but when the afternoon sun hit it at the right angle, it went blue. Deep true gulf at the end of the day, blue. The color of something that had always been there, just waiting to be uncovered. Drexel stood in the yard looking at it the afternoon Owen finished the 3rd coat. He didn't say anything for a long time. Owen waited. He'd learned to wait for what Drexel actually meant to say because Drexel rarely said anything he didn't mean, and the delay was part of the meaning. I have been working on boats for 35 years, Drexel said. Owen waited. In 35 years, I have never seen a first hull job that looked like this. Owen looked at the hull. He had lived inside this work for 8 weeks. He knew every inch of it from the inside out. He knew where the difficult sections were. He knew exactly which spots he'd had to redo. He could locate those spots right now without looking at his notes, just for memory. But he also knew the way you know something you've done honestly and completely, that the hull was right, that it was true, that it would hold. My dad taught me, Owen said. Drexel nodded. That was all. That was enough. The night before Owen opened the envelope, it rained. Hard. A proper Gulf Coast storm, the kind that announces itself with a drop in air pressure in the afternoon and arrives by 9 in the evening with lightning and wind and rain that came in sideways across the bayou and hit the cabin windows like gravel thrown by someone with a grudge. Owen had moved back onto the boat. By then, the cabin was still gutted, still very much a work in progress, but he had his sleeping pad and bag and the camping stove, and the new roof he'd temporarily covered with rolled roofing material was tight enough to keep the rain out. The rain hit the steel roof like a drum played by someone who didn't know when to stop. Loud, constant, relentless. Owen lay in the dark. Sully pressed against his side, warm and present. The boat moved in the storm, not dangerously, not alarmingly, just alive, present, doing what a hull is supposed to do, which is hold between the water and everything inside, worth protecting. The mooring lines were taut and holding. The steel was doing its job. And Owen thought about his father. Not in the desperate way he'd thought about him in the first year after the accident, when every memory had a raw edge that cost something. Not that. Just thought about him, remembered things with the ordinary clarity of someone who had enough distance now to see the shape of what had been there. The smell of the garage, motor oil and metal shavings, and the particular coffee his father made that was always exactly twice as strong as necessary. Remember Daniel's hands, large, permanently stained at the knuckles from years of work moving over a piece of metal with a confidence that looked from the outside like something between certainty and tenderness. Remembered him saying, "A good weld is invisible. You shouldn't be able to see the work. You should only see what the work made possible." Owen looked up at the ceiling in the dark. He couldn't see anything, just black. He said quietly to the ceiling, to the storm, to nobody specific, "I think I got something right, Dad." Sully licked his hand once, then settled back. The rain kept coming. The hull held. Morning. The storm had moved on. The bayou was washed clean and utterly still. The cypress trees dripped in slow sequence. The air smelled like wet earth and water and something green that didn't have a name in any language Owen knew. Owen got up, made coffee, sat on the deck in the early light with the mug in both hands. He opened the notebook to the last page of Harlan's writing. Read it one more time. "Do the hull first, all of it. When it's done, and you'll know when it's done because you won't be able to find anything else wrong with it, open the envelope. Not before." Owen looked at the hull. He had been over every inch of it yesterday before the storm came. He could not find anything else wrong with it. Not one thing. He reached into the back cover of the notebook. The envelope was there, tucked in against the inside cover, sealed the flap, reinforced with tape that had dried and crinkled with age. No name on the front, just 4 words in Harlan's handwriting. "You'll know. Open it." Owen looked at those 4 words for a moment. He thought Harlan didn't know my name, couldn't have known who would come. But somehow he knew someone would. He thought some things don't require knowing the specific person. They just require the right conditions. And the right conditions had been met. He opened the envelope. Inside 2 items. A small brass key, tag attached with a loop of thin wire. On the tag, in Harlan's tight functional script, First Federal Bank of Houma, safe deposit box 114, and a document. 3 pages folded in thirds, notarized, date stamped. September 14th, 2022, 7 months before Harlan died. Owen read it slowly, read it twice, then a third time, paying attention to different things each pass. It was a legal document. Not complicated, written in clear, direct language, the kind of language a man insists on when he doesn't trust ambiguity. The substance was this. Harlan Guidry, of sound mind, established that the contents of safe deposit box 114 at First Federal Bank of Houma, Louisiana, were the lawful property of the legal owner of the vessel, provided that said owner had fulfilled the condition of completing the hull restoration as documented in the repair notebook left aboard the vessel. The document was witnessed by a notary named Simone Broussard. It was completely legal, completely in order, because of course it was. Because Harlan Guidry was a man who respected paper, who understood that paper is what holds things in place in the world when the people involved are gone. Owen sat on the deck with the document in his hands. The sun was fully up now. Gold on the water, gold on the new Navy hull. Sully put his head on Owen's knee. Warm, patient. Owen sat there for a long time. He thought about $15. He thought about a man who had planned this, not in the last weeks of his life, not in some urgent scramble before the end, but years in advance. Methodically, carefully, the way a good welder approaches a difficult joint. Understand what you're doing before you do it. Make sure everything holds before you walk away from it. He thought about what Buddy had said. A man who pays his debts like that doesn't leave loose ends. He folded the document carefully, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope inside the notebook, set the notebook in the driest corner of the cabin. Then he went to find Drexel, because whatever was in that safe deposit box, whatever Harlan Guidry had been setting aside for 46 years, he wasn't going to walk into that bank alone. And because Teal was still out there, and the box wasn't open yet. And Owen had a feeling cold and clear and certain in his chest, like the sound of a good weld cooling right, that the next part was going to be harder than the hull. But the hull had held. So would he. Part 3. What honest men leave in steel boxes. First Federal Bank of Houma was a small brick building 2 blocks off Main Street. Nothing fancy, nothing that announced itself. Just a bank that had been in the same location since 1961 and had no particular interest in being anywhere else. Owen walked in with Drexel beside him and the notarized document in a manila envelope under his arm and the brass key in his jacket pocket, and Sully waiting outside, tied to a parking meter with a length of dock line because apparently banks had strong institutional opinions about golden retrievers in their lobbies, which seemed like a failure of judgment on the bank's part. But fine. The woman at the front desk looked at Owen, looked at Drexel, looked at the manila envelope with the focused attention of someone trained to notice what people carry into banks. "Safe deposit box," Owen said. "Box 114. Account holder's name, Harlan Guidry, deceased." Owen set the envelope on the counter. "I have legal documentation establishing my right of access. Notarized, dated September 2022. She looked at the envelope. Then she went to get the manager. The manager was a woman in her 50s named Patricia Turode. She had the manner of someone who had processed unusual situations before and had developed a clear methodology for them. She read the document once, then again more slowly. Then she looked at Owen over the top of her reading glasses. "How old are you?" she said. 70. "And you restored the vessel yourself?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you have documentation of that?" Owen pulled out his own spiral notebook, the one he'd maintained throughout the hull restoration. Every section, every date, every material used, photographs printed at the drugstore on the way over, organized chronologically, showing the hull at each stage from worst condition through completed restoration. He set it on the desk. Patricia Turode looked at the notebook, looked at the photographs, looked at the notarized document again. Then she looked at Drexel. "You can vouch for this work. I watched him do every inch of it," Drexel said. "That is the most thorough and correct first hull restoration I have seen in 35 years of working on boats, and I am not a man who says things like that without meaning them precisely." She set everything down. She picked up the brass key. "Follow me," she said. Box 114 was in the back room. Steel deposit boxes floor to ceiling. The room smelled like cool metal and something dry and institutional, fluorescent lights. No windows, no natural reference to the world outside. Patricia Turode used her master key. Owen used his. The box slid out long and heavier than Owen had expected. She set it on the table. "I'll give you some privacy," she said. And then Owen was alone with whatever Harlan Guidry had been putting aside year by year for 46 years. He stood there for a moment, just stood there. He thought about a man who came back from Korea at 21 and got his welding ticket and worked for 40 years and lived on a 34-foot boat and spent almost nothing. A man who sealed a steel box to his hull with 4 clean, deliberate welds and wrote instructions in a leather notebook and had his legal intentions notarized 7 months before he died. A man who planned for this moment. Not for Owen specifically. Owen hadn't existed yet when most of this planning happened. For whoever, for the right person. For the person who would show up with the right combination of need and knowledge and